Hello and welcome to Rage Create. I hope you're doing very well. Now, today at Warhammer World, Games Workshop are running an open day, or they ran an open day. I'm pretty sure it's finished by now. I think it's just one day, not a 2-dayer. And they do announcements there. So there's announcements for 40k, Age of Sigmar, etc. But the announcement that they left till the end of the day, the big one, is talking about pointy elves. Now, these are your basic classic high elves from Warhammer Fantasy in the days of yore, and I want to talk about them, and I also want to talk about how that relates to Age of Sigmar as a whole, and the announced many years in the future Warhammer Fantasy Battle Returns. If you like this video, press like. If you're not subscribed to the channel, you're interested in wargaming as a whole, please do subscribe. That really does help. So we'll crack on and watch the trailer for this, because we can. I have that set up. That's what I did. And yeah, so we'll do that. What am I talking about here, right? So it seems that we've recently-ish, with the Empire returning, and now with the High Elves, there's probably other factions that have essentially come back from being squished when Warhammer Fantasy went to Age of Sigmar. Some of the factions were essentially null and void. They may have had like sheets that you could use, but they weren't being continued in a traditional sense. Now, the High Elves are essentially coming back. They'll probably come up with a better name than the Pointy Elves, but for all intents and purposes, these are classic High Elves, right? They're just Pointy Elves, proper Elves, whatever you want to call them. They're not the Sea Elves, they're not the Witch Elves, these are proper Pointy Elves, right? Now, if my main point of this video is, if you get rid of Warhammer Fantasy in the first place, and one of the reasons you do so is because you want unique IPs, maybe you want to go from square bases to round bases. There's quite a few reasons why you would want to do such a thing, but one of the reasons we as a community thought was that they wanted to have proper trademarkable names. Now, that's probably the reason they're called Elves instead of, High Elf, because they don't have those generic names. But if you continue to bring back, normal humans, high elves, or whatever, Cadron overlords are basically dwarfs. Is there that much difference? There's quite a few factions that they're doing that with, and maybe there'll be more. I know, like Bretonnians, somebody would really like Bretonnians, but some people would like Tomb Kings, although like Ossiarch, Bone Reapers sort of felt Tomb King-y. If you're going to bring these back, you're diminishing the reason for your game to even exist, if that makes sense. I think part of the reason Games Workshop feel comfortable doing this now is that it feels like Age of Sigmar is its own thing. They've made it its own thing. It's a standalone thing, and people are happy with it. Bringing back old favourites, if anything, just a boon for people who want to play those factions. The interesting thing to me is you got rid of Warhammer Fantasy, you're then bringing back Warhammer Fantasy again, and then you're going to have your new current normal game going to have factions from that era as well, aren't they? Obviously they're going to have a new set of models and stuff like that, but I just find its existence to be a little bit unusual. And I won't show you too much of this, but this is just the website, just in case you wanted to check it out, just to say that they say it's going to be like tech lists, so proper elves, normal actual elves are coming back, and I find that to be really fascinating. And I'm just curious what your guys' thoughts are on it. As I said, for those two reasons, you had your unique IP because you got rid of your standard fantasy IP. I don't want to dismiss any game that has like high elves in them or wood elves or what have you, but the goal, it seemed to the outsiders, was that we want to get rid of those generic terms. It's why orcs are Aurochs and that kind of stuff, right? I don't think there's any denying that Games Workshop definitely had a goal and a trend of uniquely identifying their IP. And then it now feels like, well, we're not that concerned with that anymore. We're actually just going to bring back the old favourites, and Age of Sigmar is going to be the skirmish game in round bases. Everybody's happy kind of thing. And a lot of people are happy. Like, a lot of people like Age of Sigmar for sure. You could leave it there, but the weird thing to then is that secondary part where if you're going to bring back Warhammer Fantasy and it's going to have high elves, wood elves, humans, the Empire, whatever you want to call them, it's going to have those instead of like Stormcast Eternals, Cadron Overlords. You can tell I don't really play Age of Sigmar, so this is why my references might seem either incorrect or flat out wrong. But those factions are going to, the normal fantasy factions are obviously going to exist in Warhammer Fantasy. It would be weird if they didn't have them. But then if you have them in Age of Sigmar, I feel like the differentiating factor becomes a little bit more diminished. Now, I know this might seem like an overreaction. It's like, Jay, they've done humans and elves. I don't know if they've brought anything else back. I can't think of it off the top of my head. With like, I mean, could you call the dwarfs being dwarfs? I don't really know. The ogres, I think that the ogres come back. Not 100% sure. For sure, from an outside perspective, it feels like if I wanted to pick up Age of Sigmar right now, a lot of the factions that I used to play will exist, but maybe with new models. If I really wanted to play my old models, then they might have war scrolls or whatever yonks ago, but they're not really relevant. It's like, yeah, you've got to buy these. And I can see why some people would maybe a bit better if there's like all new, fresh, high elf like range, completely different units, and you can't really use your old ones. People would be like, I guess I got to wait a few years before I can use them. But then on the other hand, if in a few years' time where the game we have Age of Sigmar and we have Warhammer Fantasy, and you could use them in both, people will be like, you're splitting your audience. So I don't really have a problem with it or anything like that. I'm just curious to see them doing this. Like, I find this a little bit unusual for the reasons I mentioned. It's not going back on their decisions, but it feels like it was maybe an orchestrated plan to, right, we're going to differentiate Age of Sigmar completely from Warhammer Fantasy. Then we're going to bring back some stuff from Warhammer Fantasy. And then we're going to actually have Warhammer Fantasy back in a different form. I just find it unusual. My head can't quite make sense of that, if that makes sense. Are you happy about seeing the old factions return? Are these old factions going to actually get you back into the fantasy version of a Warhammer game? Obviously, Warhammer Fantasy, I'm presuming most of you don't play. That's just the hard, cold truth of it. Yes, it's the 9th edition age thing, whatever it's called, but most people aren't playing it. So would you be tempted by if you were a high elf player and you used to play Warhammer Fantasy, would you be tempted by the return of pointy, proper elves? Or are you just going to wait for Warhammer Fantasy? I think the audience for these are people who basically play Age of Sigmar now, but maybe really enjoyed some of the old factions. I'm not sure how many people would now, knowing that Warhammer Fantasy is on the horizon, go, you know what, these high elves, these are going to get me back playing, well, I'm going to start playing Age of Sigmar. I say that, I really like elves. I used to play like dark elves, but mainly just because I didn't want to play the good guys, but I really like elves. So I might buy these. After all that, I might buy these. But let me know your thoughts. I know the Bretonians. I know you want Bretonians, and I know for the lady. But are there any factions you really wish they would bring back? Bretonians and Tomb Kings, I think, are they stand out. I don't think Lizard Men are in there. Maybe, I'm not sure. Are they? Let me know. I don't know. I don't play enough. Well, I don't play any. But yeah, so I just wanted to talk about it just because I find that this trend interesting. And my brain can't quite put it in the right shelf in my head, and I don't quite understand what the long-term plan is or what they're doing. So I'm hoping maybe you can let me know. Have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.